Hello, and welcome to the 24th video in my Punishing Graven lore series. Today we will cover the 17th chapter of the main story, The Surviving Lucem. Previously in chapter 16, Babylonia launched an assault on the Hive Mother located in the Pulea Forest Park ruins, all in order to bring back a sample to advance research on the Omega File. During the operation, the Red Tide evolved into the Heterosapiens, and the Hive Mother birthed a pair of unidentified twins. These events reignited the flames of war on the surface, and the twins' overwhelming strength proved too much for the Babylonians, who were nearly wiped out. The remaining survivors are forced to retreat as the twins cut a path across the planet, struggling to survive as aid from Babylonia is effectively cut off. The situation is bleak, the stakes are dire, but no matter how long the night, dawn will always follow. Now without any further delay, let's dive into chapter 17, The Surviving Lucem. The last transport ship crashes to the ground, and the surrounding hetero creatures swarm, screaming out in victory, having consolidated their air superiority. Now survivors hide in underground bunkers to avoid the dangers of the surface. When Longinus fell, the Hive Mother was destroyed, but the massive amount of virus within it didn't just disappear. Instead, it was scattered across the surface, followed by waves of both hetero creatures and sapiens rampaging across the world. At the start, the citizens of Eden welcomed the rescue attempts, with Strykhawk and Cerberus being sent to lead the evacuation. However, the more transports they sent down, the more they lost, with those trapped on the ground admitting the skies are no longer safe. The elite team stuck on the surface soon encounter the Red Tide once again, and Asimov tells them to let it be, since it no longer relies on a single source, and is instead produced by the remains of each individual casualty on the battlefield. When the fires sweeping the forest finally went out, a horde of hetero creatures emerged, sweeping across the planet. The impact from the twins was negligible in comparison. They walked to the west coast, stealing knowledge from the fallen humans and constructs, eventually linking with the hetero creatures, and together they slaughtered 37 cities down to the last man. Eventually the survivors began using avoidance tactics, predicting where the twins would go in advance and fleeing in the opposite direction. One city's residents successfully managed to hide underground, but when this tactic was used in the following city, the residents were burned to death where they hid, showing how fast they grow in wisdom. Most frightening of all, they do this with no malice. The twins regard humanity as no more than just another resource on the planet, another thing to learn about. As the twins move north to the ARU, people head south, hiding in the basements of old conservation areas with a single wish: to live. Once again, Hassan calls a meeting between the governing bodies to discuss their next steps. Originally, they agreed to the idea of rescuing those on the surface, but as of late their losses far outweigh the benefits. Over 750 aircraft sent over 300 plus rescue operations, and their success rate has dropped to under 5%, with Hassan suggesting they postpone rescues until another strategy is discovered. After the meeting, Hassan is joined by Nicola, and the two watch a report submitted by Lucia detailing Grey Raven's situation. They manage to escape the park and are holed up in City 43 with 67 humans and 15 days worth of supplies. Vanessa and Babynata are also there, with Teasel being MIA. As for Commandant himself, he suffered a head injury during the evacuation and is now in a coma. Hassan makes two suggestions. First, informing the people of Grey Raven's status. Even though their situation is dire, if the population is kept in the dark, it will only breed rumors and doubts. Second, he wants to use the situation to strike a deal with Corono. The Omega prototype is complete and can absorb the virus, but it can't actively draw it in. However, after stealing some information, Asimov learned of Corono's Ascendant-based frame, and if the two are compatible, there may be something to bring to the negotiating table. Before the Pulea Forest incident, Babylonia had used the Longinus to destroy the Red Tide, but they could not destroy the virus. Instead, what they did was evaporate the condensed liquid form into a vapor the Hive Mothers were slowly absorbing. This is what gave the impression of virus levels dropping around the world, but unknown to anyone, the Hive Mothers were using this virus to breed a much larger threat. Now with the CPF gone, the virus has returned to the outside world, giving rise to the increase of hetero creatures and sapiens ravaging the surface. After yet another failed rescue mission, it becomes clear that this crisis will not end anytime soon. Now hiding in the underground bunker are 164 survivors, 10 constructs, 6 of which were rescued from downed transports, and 2 commandants. With no way back to Babylonia, the constructs entrenched themselves, sending out scouting parties to find supplies, before battle damage and lack of maintenance render them immobile. Lee returns from his search and finds that Lucia has yet to return from City 44, along with the twins making their way back south to City 41. If they head back towards Pulea Forest, then they can ensure their safety for a little while longer, but if they head to City 42, their current location of 43 could become their next target. Before Lee sets out, he brings in 2 of the 3 refugees he found, 2 young boys, one of whom is named Stanley, and his dog Matches. As they are introduced to the other survivors, one of them asks what's to be done about the dog, and this single question ignites all the anger the refugees had been holding in, as they despise the idea of sharing their already meager rations with more survivors, let alone a dog. As the argument turns to violence, Liv steps in to calm the situation, only to be assaulted by one of the refugees, who apparently forgot she's a superweapon and breaks his hand hitting her. She takes Stanley to a separate room to clean his wounds and ask about Matches. Why take the burden of caring for a pet when your own life isn't guaranteed? But that's the very purpose of it. As of right now, his life has no direction outside of caring for the dog, so if he has to live without Matches, his life will no longer be worth living. Liv agrees that it's a beautiful thing to find purpose in another, but to still cherish his own life, as others find purpose in him. On Babylonia, Hassan calls another meeting with the Parliament to find a solution to their problem, and he brings up the Omega prototype, saying it represents a possibility of changing their situation. A Parliament member speaks up against this plan, suggesting that they cut off the surface forces and focus on making Babylonia self-sustainable. Nicola reminds those in agreement that the twins are not Babylonia's only threat. Both the hetero creatures controlling the skies and the Ascendants, who have proven Babylonia is reachable, will not simply stop because they turtle up and hide. Instead, Nicola suggests using Project Winter to help solve their issue. The frame created from Project Winter actively draws in the virus, much like an Ascendant, but since the person controlling the frame isn't one, they can't resist the corruption all that virus brings, subsequently causing the frame to go out of control. It also cost the lives of several commandants who died trying to stabilize the mind of the corrupted constructs. The Omega prototype can handle the absorption of the virus, but as for the polluted mind beacons, Commandant, who was able to handle a connection with Alpha, remains the best option. Lucia, Liv, Lee, and Chrome have all reached the needed mind stability to handle a specialized frame, but since Lucia and Chrome have already been affected by their frames, they are poor choices for such a risky mission, leaving only Lee and Liv. Commandant has already refused once before to participate in Project Winter, but with his potential involvement being limited to stabilizing a frame, Hilda believes the Control Court's supervision will be enough to ease his concerns. Moving on to the next order of business. To put any part of his plan into motion, Graven must evacuate the surface. Hassan brings up a not-so-secret Coronal base in City 47, with transports and a shuttle to bring them back to Babylonia. The Coronal-backed councilmen whisper amongst themselves, trying to come to an agreement, with their main concerns being how can they know the Omega prototype will work on the surface, and what if Commandant's condition doesn't improve? All these things will remain unknown variables unless Coronal agrees to cooperate, and with motivators like fear and curiosity taking over, they agree to Hassan's plan. Back in City 43, another day passes for those trapped in the basement. Some meekly play their instruments, deal cards, or wallow in despair. Liv makes her rounds checking on the wounded, the stress of days without maintenance taking its toll on her as well. Suddenly there is a knock on the door, and opening it she finds a pregnant woman and a man holding an injured child. Liv brings them inside and treats the child's wounds, learning that he was injured while on his way to another conservation area. Stanley asks why the child would be allowed to go off on his own, and the woman admits she had a broken ankle, so the boy went ahead to look for supplies, despite the man's bag being filled to the brim with food. Stanley uses this as proof that the two were incapable for caring for a child, then begins yelling, questioning her decision to get pregnant in such a hostile world. Stanley's parents were just like the two in front of him now, except they knew conservation areas gave preferential treatment to expecting families. His parents exploited this privilege to get more supplies, but when he grew too old for special treatment, he was abandoned. As he goes on, more refugees gather around to listen in, with his next question being directed at the woman. Why would she have a child in a world where their future cannot be guaranteed? a life where that child will face hardship and suffer. The woman and the room go silent, until the man steps up only to say that the child doesn't belong to either of them, and that he and the woman's husband were merchants, and half the supplies belonged to her husband, which is why he couldn't just give them away. Stanley apologizes for misunderstanding the situation, and Liv tries to answer the question in the woman's stead. She compares the woman's situation to his own. He takes care of Matches, who by all means is a burden, but his presence gives Stanley's life meaning. As for the woman, without people like her who are willing to have children in this hellish world, what would be the point of fighting? Children are the motivation for those who are alive to try and create a better world. They are the embodiment of the hope for a better future. Having lightened the mood just a bit, the crowd calls for introductions. The woman, named Fantine, was headed to City 44, but the CPF was attacked by hetero creatures. On her way, she met Shrek, who was out searching for her husband, unaware he had already fallen victim to the tide. Hearing his name, Liv remembers the memories she had seen in the Spear of FOS, but decides now isn't a good time to bring it up. The man decides to rest in the basement before heading back out to search for Serum, and with all the rapidly changing events, Liv can't help but vocalize her wish for Commandant to be by her side. As night falls, most of the refugees begin falling asleep, but for the constructs, their work has just begun. They stand guard protecting the conservation area, or head out on scouting missions, and the same is true for Liv. She writes in her diary, taking note of the refugees rescued, their conditions, and their treatment options, or lack thereof. When they first retreated from the CPF, they had so many teams, and at least enough supplies to sustain themselves. But as time passed and lives were lost, the hope that was once there slowly vanished. Now each day isn't a countdown until rescue, it's a counter, adding another day they suffer in fear and hunger. She looks through her notes on the injured, hoping to find some way to help, but no amount of wishing can fix their need for supplies. Suddenly she is called to another room as Akane, one of the refugee children, cries. To comfort the child, she begins to sing, drawing the attention of Chuck and the other musicians. He picks up his guitar and joins in, as the others drum out the rhythm. Slowly a crowd forms around them as Liv sings a song of mourning, a song for lost loved ones, fallen friends, for the pain they endure to survive. The next day, Lucia and Lee return from their scouting of cities 44 and 45, bringing back a large sack of rice. Although they were unable to find medical supplies, as the other conservation areas are even worse off. Lee found out the twins are still in City 41, which puts them in danger, but before he can say anything else, a refugee spots the bag of rice in Lucia's hand. He shouts in excitement, getting the attention of everyone else in the basement, and they rush to make preparations. For those trapped down here, the possibility of a hot meal was a gift from God. Together they husk the rice, prepare the stove, and boil the water. The mood completely changes, with everyone gathering around to help, talking and laughing as the smell of porridge fills the air. Suddenly, a woman named Jin begins crying, as her friend Lindsay will likely not make it through the night, and her wailing brings everyone back to the reality of their lives. Once again at a loss, Liv remembers the words of her old professor, reminding her that if she cannot remain emotionless in the face of death, she should learn to use that pain and sadness as motivation to save the next person. For those who are unable to remain calm or indifferent when confronted with death, persuasion remains a more useful tool than force. Liv suggests they sing, and the musicians among them follow Chuck's lead. The crowd joins in, and everyone finds solace in the lyrics, letting the words carry away their feelings. In the next room over, Grey Raven meets with Vanessa, who points out that Babylonia has cut off supplies to the ground teams for the time being. Still having access to GPS information, Vanessa learns the twins have made their way to City 42, meaning their next target is likely 43. They decide now is the time to evacuate the residents to other conservation areas. They decide to split the residents into 3 groups and send them to cities 44, 45, and 46, moving the wounded first, since the twins haven't made a move towards 43 just yet. However, as soon as the plan is made, Liv detects a massive horde of hetero creatures making a beeline for the city, giving them 8 hours at most to clear out. They leave the room to find a group of refugees already packed. Liv asks where they are going, and it turns out the leader was listening in on their discussion. He decides to take the few vehicles they have and head to a forsaken base, likely unaware of the hetero creatures. After hearing the truth, the basement erupts in protest, with some even suggesting they leave the wounded behind to die, so long as the healthy can get to safety. Since time is a very limited resource, they quickly decide to transport all of the wounded using 2 of the vehicles. Then they will make a return trip to pick up those on foot, lastly returning to City 43 to pick up all those in critical condition who have to stay behind with Vanessa and Commandant. They load the trucks and embark on a 5.5-hour journey before arriving in City 45, where Shrek calls in a favor with a Forsaken doctor to come look after the wounded, as the constructs head back to City 43. In the hours after the first departure, the conservation area is still not completely evacuated due to the slow travel speed of the group, as Vanessa monitors the hetero creature horde, repositioning constructs on the surface as needed. She finishes her work and begins speaking to the unconscious Commandant. She mocks him, brushing her hands across his face before resting them on his throat. She leans down, whispering in his ear, saying that at one point she saw him as a rival, not for merit, but in ideals. She hated his naively positive outlook on the world, but seeing the person she put so much attention towards in such a state. Over what? All the battles he's been through, and something as simple as this is what finally put him down. She takes one last look at the man on the bed before heading to the surface with the other constructs. An hour and a half before the arrival of the hetero creatures, in the basement sits Stanley and the young boy who was supposed to leave with the first group, but tripped in the warehouse and was trapped with a sprained ankle. The two talk as the boy pulls out a sketchbook from his brother. In it are drawings of things they dreamt of having one day. Nice food, a big house, and a kind family. At the bottom of the page is a note from his mother. "I'm sorry for bringing you into this world." The boy can't read, so Stanley tells him it's a message of encouragement. And as night falls, the two boys get some sleep, listening to the cries of those still trapped in the basement. The next day, Graven managed to speed back to City 43 in just 3 hours, with the team greeted by Jin's frantic crying, as Lindsay had finally passed the night prior. Liv calms her down by saying that Lindsay gave her life so that she could live, and Jin has a responsibility to make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain. Vanessa snaps the basement back to reality by letting everyone know the hetero creatures will soon arrive, effectively making this the last trip. Everyone scrambles to the surface for a spot in the cars, with the roar of the horde now being within earshot. The vehicles are already overloaded as is, and any more would render them unable to outrun the horde. Vanessa cuts off those who can board and signs the death warrants of those left behind. The boy cries, pleading and begging not to be left behind. Liv tells him to hide in the basement with the others and that they will make a third trip. Hearing this, Stanley agrees to give up his spot for the boy, and this inspires the old woman, named Lena, to give up her spot for Jin so that she can stay with her husband. Before they pull off, the boy tears out a blank page from his sketchbook and gives it to Stanley, telling him it can make his dreams come true. Several minutes after the vehicles pull off, Vanessa looks back, still able to see the outline of the city. She realizes they can't outrun the hetero creatures at this rate and need to cut the load. Vanessa and Graven go back and forth, arguing over whether forcing people out to speed up the cars or continuing as is and risk fighting the hetero creatures. Seeing their refusal to flee, Vanessa is reminded of Teasel, who hasn't been seen since Longinus fell. Either injured or defected, she couldn't care less, but still she can't help but think. Egret has attracted many constructs due to their low team casualty rates and beneficial tactics, but when faced with such an unwinnable battle, defection seems like a logical choice. But this isn't the first time it's happened. Whenever things get tough, her puppets always turn tail, no matter how thoroughly she trains them. But Graven is different. Even with their commandant comatose and their frames damaged, they should be looking for a chance to escape, but they won't. Instead, they are willing to risk their own lives to keep Commandant's faith. Harley Joe, Simon, Yata, and Eleanor all felt the same way, refusing to go back to Babylonia until they had done everything they possibly could, and the only thing she can say is why. She remembers something her instructor once said in FOS college: "If you detest life and despise worthless things, you will lose everything." At the time, she thought it was nothing but useless garbage meant to inspire cooperation, but looking at the sight in front of her, her foundation collapses. The naive fool she hated so much is currently useless, but the constructs around him are doing everything in their power to protect him, to follow his ideology. She reaches out and smiles, telling everyone to go as she deals with the Hero creatures, to prove that she too can achieve victory with her constructs, not as puppets to be used, but as companions to be cherished. Bambinata carries Vanessa back towards the city, as the light of the morning sun illuminates the ocean of red heading right for them. Shortly after the second evacuation, those in the basement hear a massive explosion in the distance, as the mass of Hero creatures above them continue across the conservation area, heading towards the explosion and ignoring those beneath it. The footsteps continue on, along with more explosions getting further and further away. They have no idea of knowing what is happening, but as the sounds of the Hero creatures fade away, the purifier begins to malfunction. It starts pumping virus-contaminated air back into the basement. With it no longer being safe, Lena and her husband head to the surface, only to return shortly after, having found nothing but red tide. After 5 hours, Stanley assumes they must be well on their way back, giving him some comfort. The three distribute the last bits of supplies, with Lena and her husband taking the last 2 serums and Stanley the food, before he heads to another room to sleep. By the time he wakes up, 10 hours have passed. Even through his protective suit, he can feel his wounds festering, as Matches tries to distract him from the pain. He remembers City 44's CPF malfunctioning, and wonders if it's as bad as what's happening now, and if he could make the trip himself. But he believes in Liv's words, trusting her promise to return as tears stream down his face. He takes out the paper the young boy gave him, drawing a wish he knows deep down won't come true. A simple pair of wings. Wings to grant him freedom, to take him far away from the virus and the red tide, to a place he and Matches can be happy. 15 hours have passed with no news from the outside. The man wakes up to find Lena has already passed, without so much as a chance for him to say goodbye. He takes her in his arms. With starvation, cancer, and infection guiding him, he knows he will follow in her footsteps before long. 24 hours have passed since the troop left the city. Stanley tries to go back to sleep, as it's the only thing that relieves his pain, but the hunger and infection force him awake. Suddenly he hears a sound at the door, and it's like a shot of lightning in his soul, giving him the strength to stand, to fight off hunger and fatigue at the prospect of rescue. He rushes to the couple in the next room, only to find them cold and stiff, their wounds and flesh already becoming red tide, much like his own. With all his strength, he opens the gate, only to find nothing. He cries out, "Where are you?" hoping, praying for any reply, with the silence of the ruins being his only answer. Hoping that maybe it might have been a stray scavenger, he searches the entire conservation area. 28 hours have passed since the evacuation. No one is coming back. He mutters to himself as he sits on top of a nearby building. Everyone is dead. He looks down at the city, having lost all hope, wanting to cry, but not having the strength to do so. He looks at the can of food in his hand. How can something so precious be so useless? It will not heal his wounds or give him strength. He is trapped on top of this building, without the energy to even climb back down. And even if he did, so what? Nothing would change. Soon he will succumb to infection, so he decides to use the food where it will get the most use. He opens the can and gives it to Matches, a smile creeping on his face. He remembers what he told Liv so long ago. If I ever run out of supplies, I'll abandon myself, not Matches. He talks to the dog to distract himself, wondering if they will ever come back, or if they will be sad when no one is left. Not that he will be here to see it. He writes a message on the back of the paper and stuffs it into the cleanest pocket of his shirt. In his mind, the boy finally gets his wings, turning to Matches and says his goodbyes. With a glint in his eyes, he spreads his wings and soars into the sky to embrace freedom. He gives Matches one last farewell, and the boy jumps. But a pair of spiritual wings do not allow him to take flight. Instead, he crashes into the ground, landing on a pile of empty boxes. In any other story, his pain would have ended right there, but reality is not so kind. The scraps he landed on cushioned his fall, just enough to delay the Reaper. He can no longer move his body, but hears the sounds of liquid, of his own blood. It spills onto the ground and into his lungs, preventing him from screaming out in pain. He thinks to himself, would death truly free him? No. If a man gives up life in pursuit of freedom, he is merely a slave to his desires. Did he regret giving up his seat? No. He always knew there was a chance they wouldn't return, and doesn't regret the fact he helped someone else survive. What he regrets was being born. This child who was abandoned time and time again wanted to prove that he doesn't have to be left behind, that he has worth. But sitting here suffering, he finally understands the value of life, even his own. And he's even more certain than ever that he has no regrets. And for the briefest of moments as his blood runs out, as his soul leaves his body, the boy felt what it was like to fly. It has been 32 hours since the main group left for evacuation. The sun shines bright as a gentle breeze flows through the courtyard. There Liv sits by the boy, whose body had long since grown cold. She hates herself. 13 hours after they had left, they arrived at City 46, where they fought the local scavengers to even get a chance to negotiate. In exchange for taking in the wounded, the constructs had to return to defend the city when the Hetero creatures eventually reached its borders. And having agreed, Grey Raven heads back to City 43. On arrival, the outskirts of the city had become submerged by the red tide, but still, Lucia knew a way forward through an old maintenance tunnel. Had it all gone as planned, they could have made it back in 3 hours. But life is cruel, and without a commandant present, they had no access to the twins' coordinates. By the time they entered Liv's detection range, those walking calamities had already crossed City 42. To prevent them from entering 43, their only choice was to act as a distraction. The twins were relentless, hunting down the injured constructs with ease, when suddenly they got a message from Babylonia. Having neared their limit, the team agrees to test the new Omega prototype, giving them enough time to escape and reach the conservation area. Back in Babylonia, Nicola and Hassan watch the recording of the Omega prototype's first activation. After salvaging the weapon from a crashed ship, they throw it at the male twin, whose skin begins to fester and peel off. After another ugly fight, they manage to land it on the female twin, who experiences the same result. And although they suffered many losses getting the prototype to the ground, they now have a weapon confirmed to be effective. Matches begins barking and snaps Liv out of her self-loathing. She wonders what to do with him when the paper in the boy's pocket catches her attention. She picks it up, reading his last words. He asks her to take Matches when they leave, and that even though he ended up in this state, he doesn't regret helping that boy. But most importantly, she kept her promise. She came back. Liv gives the 4 proper burials and takes Matches with her back to City 46. Her emotions begin to overwhelm her. Her powerlessness, constantly allowing innocent lives to slip through her fingers, and worst of all, Commandant's condition. If he never wakes up, that means their mistake in Pulia Forest will have cost him his life, but remembers the words he once said to her in a similar situation. It's only meaningless if you give up. And the thought of this brings her a small amount of comfort, reminding her that she must continue to move forward. Suddenly there is a commotion in the camp as one of the refugees stumbles back bloody and wounded. Apparently when Grey Raven left back for City 43, Fantine went out to look for supplies to deliver her child. So far it's confirmed from the one who made it back, all others were confirmed dead. The only one missing is Fantine herself. 10 hours ago, Fantine leaves with Johnny and some others who are willing to help out, and thanks to their assistance, she managed to collect all her supplies early. She sits on a bench waiting for the others to return, and thinks to herself, wondering if it's a good idea to bring a child into this world under these circumstances. At first she could give a positive answer with no hesitation, but ever since her conversation with Stanley and seeing a possible future for her child, she's just not so sure anymore. She has no one left in her life. Since the Pulia Forest incident, she has lost her family, companions, and her husband. While she wants to have her child, love goes both ways, and she wants to be loved by it as well, even knowing it's a selfish decision to have a child just to not be lonely. Suddenly she hears a raspy voice telling her to run, and turning around she finds a Hetero sapien walking towards her. With no time to think, she runs, pleading with God for just a little more time. For 10 hours she ran her hardest until she passed out, and the sun had long since set with the moon taking its place. The child, who should have been born in a clean room, came out unprepared in the filth of the wilderness. She can feel the bleeding won't stop. It pools under her, and her strength fades. With no time to lose, Fantine picks up the baby and wraps her in a blanket, inching her hands towards the child's neck. Strangle the girl, and she will never know hunger or pain or fear of the creatures lurking in the darkness. But it's wrong. Children come from their parents, but the child does not belong to the parents. She has the right to experience the world and decide for herself if it's worth it. But Fantine has decided to take this choice. If she wasn't pregnant, would her husband and family still be alive? Maybe. But she also wouldn't be as happy as she is in this moment. She asks herself a single question. Are you really happy? And before she can answer, her body betrays her. She pats the child on the head, and the baby cries out, signaling the arrival of a new life. She whispers a prayer, begging that her child be given the chance to live long enough to decide on her own. And as if by miracle, a pink figure rushes out of the woods. Seeing the woman's condition, Liv struggles, unable to perform the necessary operations in this environment. Fantine whispers a thank you, asking Liv to take her baby, to let her grow up and decide for herself. With tears streaming down her face, she names the girl Cosette. I don't regret giving birth to my baby girl, echoing in the night as she closes her eyes. Both the boy and the woman, two different situations, and yet they made the same choice. Seeing their conviction, she finally understands. Lives are short and they end, but that ending means a beginning for another life. Every death leaves its mark on the world by passing itself on to the next life. Even if you may never see each other again, even if it makes you sad and regretful, those who are lost continue on in the people they cherish. With her sorrow vented and resolve steeled, she vows to continue making a difference, no matter how small it seems, because those little actions, no matter how insignificant, have the power to change the world. On her way back to City 46, Liv tries thinking of ways to better make an impact when she remembers the Omega prototype. She realizes the root cause of all their problems is the punishing virus, so she asks Lucia about reapplying to test the weapon, and she promises Liv that Greyhaven will give their full support when she's accepted. Back at the camp, Liv makes her rounds, checking on the wounded and taking care of Cosette. After she finishes, she contacts Babylonia and is surprised to have gotten a response near instantly. Liv cuts to the point, asking to join the weapon testing program, and Celica makes it clear that the experiment could cost the ultimate price. But for Greyhaven, the ultimate price is the safety of the team and commandant. Next to that, their own lives are hardly worth mentioning. The potential outcome of the virus being gone is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and she refuses to allow it to slip through her fingers. At its current rate, this disaster will kill everyone anyway, so she might as well give it all she can to make a difference. And having said all she needs, Celica transfers her to Parliament. They once again confirm Liv's participation in the experiment, and after it begins, there is no turning back.
BPN08、あなたは唯一の希望になるのです。地球を取り戻し、故郷に戻るため。我々人類にはあなたが必要です。BPN08。
全軍撤退。このエリアは放棄する。繰り返す。防衛軍は全軍撤退せよ。このエリアは放棄する。
お姉ちゃん、お家に帰りたいよ。怖がらないで。必ずお家まで連れて行くから。静かにして。私が3つ数えたら他の方へ走って。わかった？うん。1、2、3。
パニシングとの戦いの中で人類はこれまで本当の意味で勝利したことは一度もありません。ゲシュタルト演算によれば、もし効果的な対策を打たなければ、誰もこの戦いを生き残ることはできません。執行部隊グレイレイブン小隊 BPN08 リーフ。全人類の幸福のために。
全人類の幸せのために。
As Liv finishes her call, she exits to find Lucia with Percy and Reyna, who had volunteered to deliver the Omega weapon. At the same time, the construct's terminals light up, and Hassan gives everyone the order to head to City 47 and make use of the supplies there for disaster relief. After reaching the city and opening the bunker, they hand out supplies to the wounded and hungry. Even those who evacuated to the other cities made the trip here, and among them is Shrek, who lets them know the Forsaken Doctor arrived and the refugees are doing relatively well. The next day, all those part of the mission to escort Liv to Babylonia make their final preparations, well aware of the fight it will take to get them into the skies. As for Graven, Lucia and Lee will stay back to defend City 46 from the incoming hetero creatures, and after taking some time to share a story and have a laugh, the mission preparations are complete, and Liv takes her leave. As the ship takes off into the sky, a girl followed by a massive black shadow walks through an area of high virus concentration, but it doesn't seem to affect her at all. Gestalt says no matter what the girl does, the outcome will remain the same, but Nanami couldn't care less. Wearing a look of seriousness, she marches forward, refusing to let humanity and their creations fall to ruin. She looks up at the sky full of nostalgia and waves goodbye. It has been 15 days since Liv returned to Babylonia. 15 days of slow, painful adaptation to her new frame. With the frame's adaptation being her only true responsibility, she spends most of her free time in the Star of Life, having carried over her habit of writing down the conditions of her patients. Cosette is being monitored in the Star of Life, and will soon be transferred to the youth center for adoption. As for Commandant, it has been 2 months since the Palia Forest Park incident, and even Simon has recovered from his coma. If he stays like this any longer, there could be complications even if he did wake up, but if he doesn't, his best option would be to become a construct. As night falls and the staff leave, Liv continues working, only stopping to read the reports from those on the surface to pass the time. Soon a new day begins, and after another round of adaptation, she heads to Asimov's office, catching a glimpse of Bianca, wearing a look of silent worry as she leaves the room. As Bianca walks out, another figure steps in. Hippocrates, Liv's old professor. Her presence gives Liv a sense of bittersweet familiarity, as Asimov explains a little more of what he knows. Chrono's ascendant frame and the Omega weapon come together to attract and absorb the virus. That much everyone is aware of. But Hippocrates wants to know where the virus is sent. At this point, where the virus goes is of little concern, as long as it's not plaguing the surface. Another major flaw is the rate at which the frame draws in the virus cannot be controlled, and if it exceeds the speed of the Omega weapon's absorption, they will get another corrupted, or worse, another ascendant. Liv herself is also aware of the risk, which is why the Purifying Force was called in to bring a failsafe to forcefully destroy Liv's mind in the case she loses control. Lastly, she wants to know why Liv was chosen. Lucia and Chrome already possess a risk of deviation from their own specialized frames, and the only one capable of stabilizing a deviated construct is currently in a coma. Lastly, of the 2 remaining candidates, she volunteered, making her the optimal choice. Hearing this, Hippocrates formally agrees to join the project, and asks Liv about any modifications she wants to make to the frame. Having thought back to her time on the surface, if she could fly over the hills, the streets, and the tide, she could have saved so many more. Remembering the note she found on Stanley, the boy's drawing that was seared into her mind, so she makes a single request: wings. The frame needs to fly. In the 15 days since Liv's departure, many have gathered in City 47 in preparation for the hetero creature attack. The twins have returned north, and during this time, Graven calls the other elite squads to the city. Although they haven't seen each other for quite some time, no one is in a good enough mood to try and catch up. Well, all except one. The 3 captains divide the 600 people into 8 groups, each headed by a construct. This way they can handle unexpected situations and maintain high mobility. As everyone begins to move, ear-piercing screams sound from Lucia's comms. Watanabe's voice comes from the other end, the signal cutting in and out, as he says the twins and hetero creatures suddenly change course out of nowhere. Actilic arrived and evacuated everyone they could help, but they are still being followed. So Lucia, Lee, and Chrome decide to merge their groups in with the others, and head to meet Aslam at Station 43. Vonnegut had Cinderella direct the twins to the train because he needs them to grow. He needs them to interact with humanity if they are ever going to be worthy of leading the new world. Roland asks what he wants them to grow into. tigers or sheep, predators or prey. But truthfully, Vonnegut is fine with either outcome, as he is not so foolish as to presume darkness without light. The twins are a mirror that reflects humanity. They have no emotions. If they are shown nothing but hatred and conflict, that's what they will give back. But if they find light in the darkness that is humanity, they will reflect it. He turns and watches the train as the twins challenge this new mechanical beast. They quicken their pace and charge forward. The whole screams out as the back carriages are blown to pieces, forcing them to abandon the cars, goods, and people to the tide. Since severing the carriages, the twins have not made another move on the train. Instead, they watch, looking at the constructs and survivors scrambling inside. The hetero creatures and sapiens, however, are not as kind, launching attack after attack as the train struggles to keep ahead while repairing damages. Jamila sits on the carriage, her poker face remaining unchanged even at the sight of Aslam's state. 35 constructs protecting 587 survivors, including Shrek, who managed to escape with the Forsaken. While discussing what to do next, Chrome gets a message from Babylonia, saying they have completed the second iteration of the Omega weapon, and plan to deliver it the next day to City 210. Additionally, the city will serve as a refuge for those trapped on the train, so they won't get involved with the fighting. As the discussion comes to a close, Jamila looks around the carriage, her gaze landing on Shrek, as she gives him a silent greeting. Welcome back. They fight off the hetero creatures and speed up, trying to put distance between them before reaching the city, when the twins decide to launch another attack on the train. Flesh and blood are sent flying as they tear through the carriages, and Watanabe charges into the wall of hetero creatures as the tide threatens to catch up and consume the train. There are 12 hours remaining until they reach City 210, with those who remain assuming hope still awaits them at the end of their journey. Blood is spilled throughout the entire night. Of the 587 survivors, only 151 live to see daybreak. After 3 suicide bombings and losing half the constructs, they have managed to put some distance between them before reaching the city. Although everyone knows the only reason it went this well is because the twins themselves did not fight. The twins are currently 130 kilometers behind the train, and with their speed, it would take only 9 minutes to catch up. All those lives sacrificed for a measly 9 minutes. But they can't stop to mourn or lament, as doing so would make them the next ones lost. They plan how to best use their time, eventually deciding to have Watanabe lead the wounded through City 210, as he's the most familiar with the area. The rest of the constructs will distract the twins, allowing those in the city to escape. The constructs who initially agreed to this plan begin to back out, now having seen the power the twins possess, and Chrome decides it would be best to let everyone decide for themselves whether to stay or go. With only 11 seconds to spare, they unload the passengers, with the exception of an immobile Shrek and a shock-ridden man named Garcia. They begin moving, thankful the twins focused on the train and ignored the fleeing crowd. Lee and Chrome set up the weapon on the sides of the train, hoping to catch the twins in the absorption field as they attack. However, they don't approach, and when Lucia brings the weapon out to confront them, they retreat behind the swarm of hetero creatures. Assuming they learn to recognize the Omega weapon, Lee puts it in a signal masking box, but this also fails, as they retreat as soon as he reveals himself. One last time, they put a pile of harmless debris in a bag and toss it out, watching as the twins pay no attention to it. While coming up with another task, the twins blitz the train, forcing the constructs to scramble for the front carriages. Shrek screams as Garcia falls off the train, but instead of falling into the tide, he is caught by the twins. However, this too seals his fate, as their bodies are composed of highly concentrated virus, and the others can't help but stare as the man rots away in their arms. The train continues speeding along while the twins are distracted and enters into a tunnel. The constructs engage the hetero creatures lining the walls, and to their absolute horror, another hive mother is blocking the tunnel. The train slams into it, rocking the carriages as the final survivor is thrown out. Lee jumps towards Shrek, grabbing his hand, but a chunk of debris smashes his arm, rendering him unable to pull the man to safety. Shrek noticed the twins didn't avoid the bag or Garcia, so surely they wouldn't avoid a harmless man holding a bag. And that's when Lee notices him carrying the Omega weapon, and the intent behind his words. Lee pleads with Shrek to climb back into the train, to try and find another way, but he knows there isn't another way. They're out of time, options, and resources. The twins are getting smarter, and this plan won't work if they become too cautious. Shrek admits that after he lost Bella, he felt like a world without her was meaningless. But because of her, he learned medicine, and even saved a few lives. While a sacrifice is meaningless for the dead, it can mean something for the living, and Shrek has decided to pass his hope for the future onto the Babylonians and Forsaken on the train, so they can continue to live and save more lives in his stead. That is his final wish. He gives Lee a smile and lets go. Just as they did before, the twins catch the man, as the Omega weapon releases its full might, completely collapsing the tunnel. The Hetero creatures crash into the weapon's effective range, completely disintegrating on the spot. The twins fling the man's body away as their skin festers and peels off, staring with fear and anger as the train speeds to safety. As the sun sets, Cinderelic appears once more, having destroyed the weapon, but the effects still linger. Vonnegut pays no attention to her report, having been captivated by Shrek's ravaged body and the faint heartbeat coming from within. He is also intrigued by the twins deciding to leave his body as is. As they walk, the two come to the conclusion the Hive Mother sensed the fear the twins acquired in Pelia Forest thanks to the scavengers, and the Hive Mother sensed this fear, rushing to protect her children. He asks her if this display of maternal bond makes her jealous, but for her, the Hive Mothers are simply vessels for Data. Everything she does, every sacrifice she makes, is for her mother and the true Cinderelic, so she can one day meet the man who killed her mother and tell him that she has returned. Vonnegut does not speak on her wish, merely accepting it in silence before asking about the twins. They are currently nursing their wounds inside the tide, but the attack command has yet to be lifted, and the Hetero creatures will continue to hunt down those constructs endlessly. She asks if he's really okay with Chrome being put in harm's way, but to him, obstacles are needed to truly test his character, so he will be watching as events unfold from the sidelines, even more so since they have barricaded themselves in the Church of the Merciful One, an entity he refers to as Oblivion itself. It has been 28 days since Liv returned to Babylonia. Repeated rounds of mind adaptation have given rise to intense mind pains, although with Hippocrates' involvement, the frequency of these episodes has dropped significantly. She regains her composure and meets with a liaison officer, who informs her of Greyraven's unchanged status. The last report received was a hastily submitted document on the Omega weapon's effects, along with the location of the church ruins. While thinking of ways to get in contact with her team, Hippocrates appears and brings her back to Commandant's room for a private conversation. If all goes as planned, this will be Liv's final 24 hours before her departure for the surface. And while she's excited at the thought of reuniting with her team, she ignores the thought of this being her last 24 hours. As far as Liv is concerned, her fate is sealed, so why bother creating more pain with tears or sad words of parting? She stares at Liv, bringing out a bag of 7 syringes, old training equipment Liv used in her student days. Back then, all of Liv's professors called her foolish for performing medical operations on herself, all in an effort to understand how to make it more painless for others. In a world where survival is the utmost priority, Liv was worried about causing a little extra pain, and this is why her professors called her foolish. But that very trait is what made her so interesting enough that Hippocrates kept up with her activities, even through her time with Greyraven. She takes Liv's hand, cursing her own inability to help. She failed to wake Commandant from his coma. She failed to buy Liv more time. And ultimately, she failed to save Liv's life. Liv thanks her old teacher for all the advice she provided, both past and present, with Hippocrates forcing that sadness deep within herself before they leave to meet Asimov for the last time. They enter the office, finding it even more empty than usual due to the classified nature of the frame and Omega weapon. There, Asimov makes it clear that unlike Glory and Plume, there will be no guarantee for her life, and that eventually she will reach her absorption limit and lose control. He also hints at one more possibility. Even as an imitation, the frame is based on an agent, and when she passes her infection threshold, there's a chance she could enter the Ascension network while conscious. And with the last of the relevant information laid bare, Hippocrates makes preparations for the transfer. Liv thinks to herself, before Greyraven she was always alone, carrying the burdens of others until she no longer could. But after meeting Commandant and the others, she didn't have to do it alone, because she had loyal companions by her side. But now she's decided to once again take that burden upon herself, as the pain and loneliness it brings are nothing compared to the suffering of those she can save. so she walks forward into the light of the operating room, her choice bringing with it a new dawn for humanity. After escaping the twins, the train came to a stop on the outer edge of a nearby forest. Before they could make repairs, they were attacked by the pursuing hetero creatures and chased into a church. They made numerous attempts to break through, only to be cornered and forced back each time, eventually deciding to stay in the church and use it as a base. Since then, it has been 10 days. With their resources soon to be depleted, Lucia's terminal lights up. Chang Yu and Sophia are pushing towards their location, bringing with them supplies and reinforcements they acquired after getting Jamila aid. After confirming the information, Lucia ends the call, not even having the strength left to be excited. The last 10 days have been a constant battle with infection, pain, and exhaustion, but even then they are not allowed the luxury of rest. The ceiling above them cracks, and the two bring themselves to their feet as the hetero creatures return. Sophia and Chang Yu fight their way towards the church, clearing waves of corrupted and hetero creatures. After finally reaching their destination, Sophia is attacked from behind, and Chang Yu rushes in to take the hit. On the other side of the church, Chrome receives the distress call, forcing his way down to their position. While Sophia holds back Chang Yu's infection, Chrome protects the two against the hordes. As he fights, he thinks of his comrades, his father, and even Commandant. As a captain, he also cares for his team, and has fought back every urge to contact them, because he knows they will rush headfirst into danger to come to his aid. Was the situation a result of his poor judgment? After Commandant fell unconscious, he received a call from Asimov asking if he wanted to transfer into his Arclight frame. Even with Glory's low deviation rate, if the impossible happens, there's no one to bring him back. Chrome refused, taking the risk because without the power of a specialized frame, he would have never gotten this far. And that answer points him to one conclusion: he made the right choice. He swings his gunblade, rending the monsters in front of him to pieces, their blood clinging to his body and weapon, increasing his infection. One more corrupted, one more second, he fights as long as possible until his world suddenly goes white. He has finally lost the strength to even move, closing his eyes as the light fills his vision. At the same time, Lucia and Lee hold off the hetero creatures attacking from the rear, setting up a series of defensive fields to stall for as long as possible. When the fields are set up, Lee sends Lucia to aid Chrome, while he keeps the hordes at bay, with Lucia confident they can survive if they work together. How long has it been since she made that promise? Now they are all pinned within the church, comms reduced to broken words and static. She once lost Luna in a church just like this, and to think she would meet her end in the same place. She thinks to herself, what if they went back with Liv, but banishes the thought. If they had left, far more people would have died, and no member of Graven would have accepted that. No member of Babylonia would have accepted that. She believes that any team would have made the same choice, even the still missing Vanessa. However, life is not merciful. She cuts down one foe, only to have a dozen more take its place. Her frame is pushed to its absolute limit, with her best guess being 10 minutes until complete shutdown. As if the gods are giving her a last wish, a gentle voice comes through her terminal, and Lucia immediately covers the camera, not wanting Liv to see her in this state. Finally, Liv is on her way to aid her team. Only an hour away, an hour they don't have. Hearing this, Lucia makes one last request. She wants to hear Liv sing. Nine hours before the call, Liv finally rises from the operating table, surrounded by government leaders, members of parliament, and many other figures she can't recognize. As the crowd clears out, Liv goes to say her final farewells to Commandant, while Hippocrates and Asimov prepare for her final adaptation. She stares at the still comatose Commandant, thinking of a fleeting conversation she had some time ago. On the nighter, she ran into a mysterious stranger, asking about the different possibilities Liv might choose, paired with their final confrontation with Wheeler and Hwashu. She wonders, would she too be willing to sacrifice everything in pursuit of a single goal? Since then, these feelings have welled up inside her, growing over the numerous tragedies she's witnessed, and she has made her choice. Just as Lucia picks up her blade to protect those who can't protect themselves. She fights every day so everyone has a home to return to. and if that calling requires her to become a disposable pawn, she will step on the board without hesitation. She presses her hands along his body, over the various wounds and scars he's acquired. She leans down, holding on to the hands that have given her so much. Now, like him, she will walk that same path for the sake of countless people stuck in this apocalypse. This is her chance to finally not feel powerless. But still, a faint pain lingers in her heart. For Liv, who sees herself as just another ordinary person, she has nothing to offer but herself. She places a series of paper boats on the bedside, formed from the torn pages of her journal, covered in blood, ash, and tears, symbols of her journey, symbols of all that she is. She takes the 7 needles and pins the boats together in the shape of a flower, a queen of the night, that blooms in the darkness only to wilt at dawn. No longer able to hold back her tears, she whispers his name. Humanity's home has been stolen by the virus, and by taking this step, she can bring an end to the eternal night and create a world where humans like Commandant can live in peace. And if that step costs her life and her reunion with him, it's a price she's willing to pay. She's made her choice, and if everyone can live in a safe world, that will be her gift, her legacy as a member of Greyraven. And with everything laid bare, she takes a bow. Her farewell to Commandant, her farewell to Greyraven.
最後の調整もうまくいった。ご苦労だったな、リーフ。
皆様の期待に応えるため、当然のことをしただけです。
こんな重荷をあなた一人に背負わせた。これは私たち全員の責任よ。
誰かがやらねばならないことですから、ご信頼感謝します。教授がヒポクラテスを名乗るのは、誓いに背いてはいけないと学生に伝えるためですよね。誓いの日から私の願いは変わりません。病気の人たちの健康と幸せ、そしてあらゆる命を尊び、一生を人類に捧げます。教授の弟子として皆様の導きのもと成長できました。とても光栄です。私は絶対にヒポクラテスの誓いを忘れません。これが私の願いですから。
もう私からあなたに教えることはないよね。リーフ、卒業よ。
はい、ありがとうございます、教授。
次の降下目標地点はグレイレイブン隊とクロムがいる教会の廃墟だ。座標から見て人型生命体もその付近にいるだろ
う。みんなは無事ですか？
通信がつながった。輸送中に彼らと連絡を取るといい。
わかりました。
リーフ、人類の希望と命、君に預けたぞ。
はい、絶対にご期待に応えてみせます。
The transport is shot down by the surrounding hetero creatures, but not a single life is lost. From out of the endless night, a pure white figure parts the clouds, descending upon the church. She purifies the infected constructs, bringing them back to their senses, and within the crowd finds 2 corrupted signals stronger than the others, but too weak to be the twins. Past the barrier, she finally reunites with Greyraven, Lucia and Lee having succumbed to their corruption. She frees her team from infection, as her light burns the hetero creatures into mist that sinks into her frame. As more constructs are freed from their corruption, they join the fight, holding back those still corrupted, as Liv becomes a gentle monster who devours the virus. But as expected, she cannot turn the absorbed virus into power, and ever so slowly, the bits not taken by the Omega weapon begin to accumulate. She can't control the rate of absorption, nor has she wanted to. For the next 3 hours, she will burn until the last of her light fades. Back in the command center, the heads of the experiments gather, watching as their labor and sacrifice finally bear fruit. As the virus is funneled into her mind, Hippocrates and Asimov notice a strange noise in the data. The red tide stores the memory data of all those who died to form as projections and fuel the Heterosapiens' mimicry, and all this memory data is being funneled into Liv as she absorbs the virus. The memories of tens of thousands of lifetimes and deaths will dilute her mind, polluting her sense of self. Hassan asks if she can be saved, but the damage is already done. Even if she survives, those memories will still linger, and she will go her life haunted by the shadow of death. Liv speeds through the streets, searching for every and anyone she can save, trading each second of her life to save another. Then she begins to hear them, the voices of the dead, their screams and cries ringing in her ears. Pain. Pain is all she can feel as those deaths merge together. She can feel her abdomen exploding, feel herself gunned down by a hail of bullets. She is ripped apart by corrupted. She is the corrupted ripping survivors apart. This is her choice. She accepts it all. Even if one spark of hope remains, she will give up everything for the world that gave her life. How long has passed in this endless dream, trapped alone in this bleak void? He calls out for his team, with the silence being his only answer. Suddenly he feels his hand burning, following the trail of tears leading him into the distance. But soon that too fades away, leaving him lost and alone once again. He kneels in frustration and exhaustion, when out of nowhere a gentle voice grabs his attention. The figure offers to get him out of the void. If things continue, he will find his freedom in a few days, but those are days he doesn't have. Everything will be over with long before then. She asks again if he will take her help, to wake up when his decisions still matter, to give him a chance to forge his own path until the eternal winter. He accepts the woman's proposal, and she wishes him a farewell on his new journey. He wakes up in the Star of Life, looking at the clock projected to see it's been 3 months since the Paleophores incident. He tries standing, his atrophied muscles screaming in protest, and almost steps out of the room when Hippocrates rips the door open. Seeing the anger on the woman's face, he asks what happens, and she lays out everything that's taken place in the past 3 months. Hearing this, he looks at the flower on the desk, finally understanding its meaning, and requests to be sent to the front lines. After confirming his mind and body are in passable condition, he gets changed, stepping out to see Hassan and Asimov. They explain that Liv's mind has been overloaded with memory data, along with a rising infection. The only way to establish a connection would be through a medium, and he has to get close, closer than his nearly crippled body will allow. While normally impossible, this type of connection will risk both him and the medium getting infected, along with a host of other issues, including the possibility of Liv's broken mind if she survives. But all the same, he doesn't care. At least if he saves Liv, she will have the opportunity to choose if she wants to continue living that way. Hassan claims he's against the idea, wanting to keep one of his most elite commandants alive, but deep down he too is looking for a miracle. He prepares a fleet of transports, ordering Commandant to bring Liv home. Through the countless deaths, she has completely lost the concept of time. Whether it's been a few moments or 100 years, she will continue to take in the virus until her life ends. Suddenly, a single voice pierces the ocean of noise, begging her to come back. Her fractured consciousness gets a moment to breathe, and she looks for the voice as her memories split into a cityscape. She wonders if this is the Ascension Network. Here there is no pain, It is serene and calm, just like death. She wonders would it be so bad if she just stayed here, but the voice cries out again. Unable to make a choice, the void creates two paths, as the mysterious figure returns, saying she doesn't want Liv to regret her choice, whatever it may be. As night falls, the crowds leave the war memorial. Inscribed on the stone is Liv's name, alongside many others who gave their lives to mend the scars of war. 3 figures remain in front of the memorial, only leaving after the human among them had passed out from his poor condition. The course of history is not shaped by individuals, but if she can serve as part of the foundation for a better future, perhaps it would be better to depart in her brightest moment. But a part of her still worries for her companions. The vision moves further into the future. Lucia shows up at the memorial alone. She places a sheep plushie in front of the monument, talking to herself. She vents her anger, not at Liv for dying, but at herself for not being able to find another way. Lucia leaves and Lee takes her place. He stares at the monument in silence, only breaking that silence to say goodbye, and from then on he never returns. Commandant and Lucia continue to visit as the toll of battle leave their mark, until one day Commandant's name appears next to hers on the monument. Then they are joined by Lucia's. Many years later, a young construct approaches the memorial. This girl is Cosette, the child Liv saved so long ago. The girl laments how ordinary she is, that her parents and Liv gave so much only for her to be nothing remarkable, that they must be so disappointed. She talks to the monument until her words turn into tears, and then the vision melts back into mist, having shown her the future of death. They defeat the twins, and in her mind, Liv can hear those around her arguing. She walks away from the scene as the voices fade away into meaningless noise. As she walks, the world turns to flowers around her, and she is joined by Lucia. She drags Lee, who Liv can only see as a black silhouette, meaning his path has deviated from what she can envision. Lucia points ahead at Commandant, who stands in the field waiting for her, looking noticeably older. These thoughts do not matter, as she has been reunited with the comrades she missed so dearly. Her happy moment is interrupted by a familiar professor who looks at her in frustration. Whatever this place is, Lucia's frame is badly damaged, and Liv has a hole in her chest. The professor inspects Liv's wounds, apologizing for everything she went through. The death visions didn't go away, even after she had switched frames, only subsiding when Commandant took the burden. But humans don't live forever, and when he died, the visions returned. He walks up and takes out her paper flower, as all the memories come flooding back. She survived the fight with the twins, at the expense of her team being badly injured. She was taken back to Babylonia, as Hippocrates begged to have her put out of her misery, but Commandant refused. From then on, she became Grey Raven's burden, being forced into rehabilitation along with Commandant, as her condition made it nearly impossible to fight. Years passed and Cosette grew into a remarkable support construct, working hard to help the sick and wounded. Together they made new allies and lost old ones. But with one problem solved, another takes its place. The world was engulfed in a decades-long winter that claimed Commandant. Then Lucia sacrificed herself, followed by Lee. And finally, having lost everything, at the end of the winter, Liv joined them. She returns to her starting point from the future of life, and that gentle voice speaks once again. I hope you would not regret this decision. On the outside, Lucia is recovering from her infection and realizes what Liv's plan is. She gives chase, using her thruster to grab hold of Liv midair. She pleads with her to stop, but Liv continues on, waving her hands like a mindless puppet. Amid her cries, Lucia gets a call on her terminal, as Commandant and Asimov explain the plan to have her force her way into Liv's mind. And with the transport finally in range, they begin the breach. Lucia rushes into Liv's mind, towards her suppressed consciousness, and is attacked by the embodiment of the memory data within her.
幸せのために。無事に帰りたいよ。私が連れて帰ってあげるから。泣かないで。私じゃなくて。あなたが泣いてるの。 束したから4人一緒に。私たちはずっと一緒。約束です。ルシアがまだ戦っているのに私諦めちゃダメ。そしてこれは指揮官の命令。一緒に帰りましょうリーフ。ルシア指揮官。
The memory cluster within Liv's mind is destroyed, and after another 30 minutes, the fleet of transports breaks through the clouds and arrives at the church. Over half the Hero creatures were annihilated thanks to Liv, and the rest are occupied with the new army of purified constructs. However, in their place at the top of the church are two creatures that more than make up for it. Commandant rushes through the church, with Sophia and Chang Yu clearing a path. Meanwhile on the roof, Lucia, Lee, and Chrome fight off the twins to protect the motionless Liv. Using Chrome's ice to freeze them in place, the three launch everything they have, but no matter what they do, it's not enough. The twins heal themselves from the virus in the air and the tide surrounding the building, while slowly adapting to their fighting styles. With Lee's predictions, they are able to cut the twins off before they can escape, leaning further into pressing their advantage, but that's what the twins were aiming for. The three constructs overtax their frames with the increase in offense, and the moment they stop to cool down, the twins launch a counter with all their might. Liv reawakens in the moments before impact, shielding her allies with a pillar of light. The twins scream out in pain as their bodies rot away, unable to handle Liv's holy flame. The other constructs rush in to physically trap the twins, as they take the full force of Liv's remaining energy. The female twin unfurls her hair into a pair of wings, trying to take her unconscious brother to safety. Liv refuses to allow this to continue. She chases down the fleeing twins, and from her body a white nova envelops the sky, blinding all who gaze upon the light. Having spent all of her energy, the angel falls from heaven, and she accepts her fate, the future of death, and prepares for the fall that will take her. She lands, not on the ground, but in a pair of soft human arms. Commandant takes out the device made by Asimov and her pocketees, connecting the cables to Liv's frame as the virus on her skin burns through his protective suit. He calls her name, shakes her shoulders, trying anything he can to get a response. Finally, the deep mind connection manages to pull her consciousness to the surface. Then the migraines begin. She curls up as an excruciating pain fills her head, but manages to thank him for granting her final wish, for coming to see her one last time. She points to the EMP collar, and he takes out a key entrusted to him by Bianca and the President. Before disarming, he remembers what he was told in that hospital room. Her living could become a worse punishment than death, so he lets Liv decide. If you know the future is paved with struggles and pain, will you still walk towards it? Without any hesitation, she says yes. Just like everyone fighting, they don't know if they will see the day Earth is recovered from the virus, but they will still keep fighting, because the only way to reach that future is to keep moving forward. Everyone has been willing to bet their lives, and Liv is no exception. If she had another chance, she would make the same choice, live the same lifetime with all her comrades, because she loves the Grey Ravens, and she is willing to die for what she loves, and she's willing to live to share their dream. Hearing her answer, her resolve to move forward, he responds in kind. No matter how difficult it may be, there are things you love. He unlocks the collar, and the girl closes her eyes, falling asleep in his arms. Their journey is far from over. Their recovery will be long and painful, but they will always be together, walking towards their shared dream. This is the future they have chosen. This is their answer. Alright, and you have all just completed Chapter 17, The Surviving Lucem. To keep this brief, the next video will be Chapter 18, because I am skipping Reveries with the Whale. I will go back and cover it eventually, it's just that the entire chapter is, just Pulau being delusional, and I can summarize the half node worth of story relevant information when it, becomes relevant. Because I'd rather really just hop into Chapter 18. I really appreciate the patience, you guys. I know this took a while to get out, and I really hope you all enjoyed it. And shouts out to you know who you are. I won't out you, but you said you'd be willing to wait for the longer video, and I hope I did it justice. It's been a long time since I read this chapter, and there really isn't a good place to split it in two, like I originally thought. I would like to think that I would have decided to make a single video on my own, like during editing, but I don't know, so I can't take the credit for it. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you all in the next video, where we cover Chapter 18 of the main story, Her Last Bow.